This is Josh King Randomness, and today I'd like to talk about land ownership and how we're actually really restricted on where we could go in the United States and probably most of the world. So, if you think about freedom, one of the aspects of freedom is the ability to navigate and move locations freely. Can you really do it? So, if you're at point A at your house, and let's just say the other side of your town is point B and you draw a straight line there, can you cross that line without invading other people's private property? No, you wouldn't be able to go in a straight line. You'd probably run into some conflicts going on that straight line. You're going to run into obstructions and what we've classified as land ownership. So if you think about it, essentially you're on a circuit board. Essentially, how we've divvied up land is like a circuit board. So essentially, your house is one of the little components on the circuit board, and how you're allowed to move is via the copper contacts in the circuit board. The rest of the circuit board you can't go through. So, for example, I'm on the BLM website, so it has essentially shows private and public property. So the colored areas are like public property, just different government agencies, but you may be able to go on the land, but there's a lot of restrictions the government places on it. So is it actually public? You got to pay uh, some money to get in there. They got, you can't freely set up a tent anywhere. Uh, so it's almost private in itself, but it's managed by the government. I wouldn't classify it as public because uh, there's a lot of restrictions with it. But for Florida, for example, anywhere where it's not a color shade is private property or right of way. So the right of way is what the government has allotted as streets, the circuit board, and you're allowed to freely navigate the circuit board, but you can't go into the individual plots of land because it's private property. So if you think about this from a freedom standpoint, uh, you're very restricted. You got to move about in a grid. You got your own little parcel that you live at. You can navigate the grid. Uh, some locations on the circuit board they allot you to go in, but you got to be a patron and you got to spend money and you got to be part of the system. So essentially, there's no free place you could go in this world, or at least the United States. Even your own parcel, the government taxes you on it. So you're not allotted a place on this planet to be able to exist for free. And I find that fucking insane. So this is what I asked ChatGPT how this fucking happened, and it's been going on since older civilizations. Um, the English they had, the landlords and the serfs. We still use the same terminology, and pretty much the same thing today. We just got different titles for it. But this is not good. So the only you got your base camp, your home, but you don't actually own it, and then you're allowed to go on the grid. You can hang out in the right of way, maybe, until the cops get you and say you can't be there, so we're going to put you in the private prison to hang out. Um, you may be able to go to a national park and hang out, but The management, the park is going to have a lot of restrictions. You can only tent here. You can't walk here. You can't do a fire here. Yada yada. Um, so Florida, for example, it's 90% private. So if you think about from a mobility standpoint, you're very restricted where you could go. You know, you could go on the beach. You go, as I mentioned before, you could go to establishments where you spend money. Otherwise, you're, what's the term? Soliciting. Soliciting is what you're doing. Um, Out west, they're doing it better. Out west, it's much better. So, for example, the state of Nevada, unlike the state of Florida, is 90% government owned, which is better than privately owned because you could actually access it even though they have their restrictions. So, I know in Nevada, for example, you could camp out somewhere for 2 weeks and then they catch you, you got to move to a new place for 2 weeks. But you have the freedom to navigate for most of the state, which is nice. And that's how really it should be. So I just gave the best and worst case probably. But out west, they're a lot better. So, you know, Colorado, it's probably like 40% public. Same with Utah, same with Arizona. So out west, the freedom to navigate is overall just better. And you go to these places, and a lot of these places have a outdoorsy culture to them, which is just overall a better quality of life. But you go out east and look at Texas. Are you actually free when you can't even access the majority of the state because it's private? Because you got cowboys that have 10,000 acre ranches. There's no public land. So you're allowed to go on, as I mentioned before, the right of way. You're allowed to go to the establishments where you have to spend money to hang out there, and you got your own little plot of land that you got to pay the government to actually hang out on it. So my rant is that how we view land needs to be changed. For example, I know some Scandinavian countries, they have laws where you could freely navigate people's yards. You can even camp out if the yard is a certain size. I feel like it should be the same way here. And I think that's a key component to freedom. We don't want to live in a world where you can't access most of the land. That's not the world I want to live in.